Hello, welcome back. Now today I want to talk a little bit about my reasons for why I am considering going back to the Catholic Church, having, I guess, walked away from the Catholic Church when I was younger. Now, I was baptised as a Roman Catholic here in Australia. I did do first communion and reconciliation when I was 9 years old. When I was 12 years old, I did confirmation. But yeah, I guess it's weird that at the age of 41 I'm considering returning to the Catholic Church because, I walked away from it when I was 20. It was something that people used to mock quite a lot, being a Catholic. People used to give you a hard time about it. I did study philosophy, and I think going through the Enlightenment and resonating quite heavily with existential philosophy, there's quite especially once you're getting into Nietzsche, you start questioning Christianity a little bit. I think I don't have to tell you why. I've been speaking to a lot of people who are, quite passionately Catholic, and I guess that's part of the reason why I'm getting influenced to return back to the Catholic Church. And I think some of the reasons are, if you bring up things that are a bit taboo, Catholics can be surprisingly liberal, even very strong Catholics. They can, for instance, if you talk about drinking and pleasure and sexuality, a lot of people who study the catechism will realize that, sexuality is something to be enjoyed. I think there's always been this great emphasis of art and music in the Catholic Church, and the decorations. When you step into a cathedral, why does it feel so spiritual? Why does it feel so artistic? One of the reasons I started connecting with the Catholic Church is a reason you might not expect, and it's the fact that I lived in Japan for a year. And as part of my time in Japan, I used to sometimes go to Shinto and Buddhist temples, and I would attend, I guess, their version of a mass. And I couldn't help but feel that there was something Catholic about a Buddhist mass. I don't know, all of the rituals and the art, it somehow spoke to me in a very Catholic way. It strengthened my faith for some reason. I felt like, the official Catholic line might not be open to pagan beliefs, but the Catholic Church somehow recognizes for some reason different religions and how they all sort of play a part. It feels like the Catholic Church is quite open in regards to incorporating people of other beliefs. That's the word Catholic, right? Universal. And it was very easy to walk away from the Catholic Church back in those early days when I just thought about religion, Catholicism as just being about the Big Bang Theory and does God exist or not? And you don't sort of realize the politics of all the different Christian groups and what they actually mean. Here in Melbourne, you'd sometimes be talking to Christians, often Chinese Christians, and they would have this quite oddly anti-Catholic stance that you wouldn't expect. They would talk about how Catholics are not really Christians because they worship Mary. That would be their claim. Or they would say that Catholics are a pagan religion. And that just made me feel that there's actually something quite rebellious about being a Catholic, and it actually made me want to become more of a Catholic. It's actually my opposition, I think, to a lot of especially evangelical Christians in America, in the USA, and realizing the power they have. And you start realizing the Catholic Church is quite a good counterbalance to that. But it's interesting that when I go to church, like for instance, when I was on a trip in Europe, and I encountered I think it was a feast day for Corpus Christi, like in Warsaw, and I somehow got pulled into the church. Like there was such a crowd, and I was just trying to take photos as an Australian in Poland, but I somehow got led into the church by some sort of a force. And soon I'm kneeling and I'm spending an hour, and it was my last day in Europe actually. I had to get a flight the next day, but I spent my last night in Europe kneeling and attending this Polish mass. And it was quite an experience, especially it was such a Polish experience, and there were so many young people. And there's something so, I know this is just a bit more of a Polish thing, but you get this wonderful feeling of relief from the fact that these people and these girls are dressed in this beautiful way. There's all these beautiful women at Mass, which I don't know if that's the case if I was to go to Mass here in Australia, but in Poland, it was very impressive, the amount of people who, just the way they dressed. There was just this great vibe, this glorious energy coming out of them. And it just made me sort of reflect on, how I'm, not religious here in Australia. I spend so much time alone. I work from home. I'm not part of any communities. I don't want to be part of most communities. Anytime I try to become part of some community, someone there is a furry or something, and then I feel like I don't want to partake. Or like even if you're hanging around some people and they might be, they might say that they're religious, but at some point they're going to ask you to come to a polycurious event or something like that. And it just starts making me wonder, if I was to start just going every Sunday back to church, there's a church down the road, would it be a good way to meet women? Would it be a good way to find some purpose in my life, to find not just some spirituality and to, feel part of a certain group, not a cult, but like it'd be so nice to just say, you know what, I'm Catholic, I go to church, I confess my sins to the priest, and there might even be ways to meet women. And there are even people that might go and say, this is part of God's plan. He wants you to go to church to meet women. And I think when you're in your 30s and you think it's completely irrational to go to church for that, why not just go to a club? Why not go to a bar, or just join any other organization, or even join a cult if that's what you're after? But I don't know. I mean, I'm 41. I'm not getting any younger. I've got this Catholic legacy. I was confirmed, so I feel at home when I'm in a Catholic church, so I don't feel like a massive fraud. Maybe I don't speak Polish, but I could go to some church that doesn't speak Polish, like in Australia, or I don't know, in Ireland or something. And basically I'll leave it there, but let me know your thoughts. Should I or should I not return to the Catholic Church? I think that there's quite a strong appeal, especially, as I said, after that Polish experience, and I guess the idea of even a little bit of sensual pleasure wouldn't go astray either. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and see you next time.